I'm always ready, dude.
Speaking of always ready, welcome back to Guff Stuff Weekly Podcast. I'm Javen.
I'm Guff.
What are we talking about today, Guff?
Mini war games.
Mini war games?
Something you've been doing a lot of lately.
I've been playing a lot of miniature war games lately, yes.
You guys played. I think you played some Legion, then you played lots of Warhammer.
We played Legion, I think, about over a year ago now it's been.
Oh,
I don't think we played
oh,
Legion.
this spring.
This spring, okay, yeah.
Yeah, when we had Gamer Joe
Yeah, yeah.
playing with us.
So we played a lot of Star Wars Legion then, if that was this spring. We played that for probably 3-4 months steady.
Yep.
And then in the past 2 weeks, I've been playing a ton of Warhammer 40k 10th edition.
Which I know nothing about.
And also mini war game that we should talk about.
Mm-hmm.
I would call it a mini war game. Gaslands.
Oh, yeah, I know a little bit of something that.
So what I kind of want to frame to start with for the mini war game.
What is a mini war game?
So a mini war game to me is a miniature war game that's played on a tabletop.
Yep.
So it's a tabletop game. Usually you need a fairly large table. Usually it's like 4x8 or 3x6 or whatever, but it's a fairly big table.
Yeah, like the standard like white folding tables are almost a little too small because you need a little bit wider, but
Yeah. Um,
4x8 is probably the better way
for
to
the for the EU viewers, it would be somewhere in the ballpark of 1 meter by 2 meters.
go. There. Yeah.
It's a pretty big board.
No, it is.
It can
Yeah,
be huge.
we have a big table and they'll fill it up pretty quick.
And so what you're doing is typically in these games you have a bunch of miniatures. We'll take Star Wars Legion for example.
Yep.
There's four or five factions that you can play, and each of these factions has access to certain miniatures, and they represent everything from tanks to infantry models to aircraft
Right.
to Jedi.
Yeah, to whatever they need to.
Basically, whatever
on
you're
the
trying to
battlefield.
represent. And
Yep.
then there's a set of statistics and rules for determining how things fight, and usually you use dice to determine.
Yeah, you got to have that variable in there, otherwise it would
Otherwise,
be as fun.
it would just settle out, and you.
Right.
It's the same reason why Magic has you draw a card, right?
Right.
There needs to be some sort of variable, otherwise the game is solved.
Right.
Or it needs to be so complex and so many moves that you can just never figure it out, like chess.
Yeah, like chess. Yeah, exactly.
And I think mini war games do a great job of bridging that gap, so to speak.
Yep.
Or finding a good middle ground where there's a lot of strategy and placement matters a lot. You're measuring distances,
right?
Line of sight. If you have typically when you play these games, you have all these miniature models on the table, and you also have terrain features on the table, such as ruined buildings,
right,
walls, fortifications, forests, hills, all sorts of things. They're all built to scale.
Yep.
And yeah, so like placement of your troops matters a lot because you can just like if you have a troop that's designed to shoot the enemy, but there's a hill between you two and you can't look at your model and see their model, you can't shoot it.
Right.
So there's a very big strategic element in that sense. But it also does a good job of like Legion, for example, of like adds a little bit of deck building and variation. You could call it that.
Right.
Because you can outfit your troops in different ways.
In different ways, yeah.
Bring rocket launchers or Gatling guns, or so you can have a squad, geared up to take down a tank, or a squad geared up to mow down infantry. You kind of don't get the best of both worlds. You have to pick and choose as you build your list. And a lot of times you don't know what the opponent's bringing until you get there.
Right.
So you end up with this game of cat and mouse of, if I bring a lot of tanks,
he's probably going to bring a lot of anti-tank.
Of anti-tank, if they know beforehand. Yeah. But there's also this idea of, like vehicles typically don't hold objectives very well.
Right.
And that's part of the gameplay of a lot of these games is you're holding parts of the map and trying to get points generated every round for holding that. And tanks and vehicles usually don't do a very good job of that.
Has those games always had objectives? Do you know if Warhammer's always had that?
As far as since I've played, which was 7th edition onwards, there's always been objective play. Most people that play casually or are just getting into it play for kill points is what it's called.
Right, yeah.
And that's every model or every squad you wipe, you add up the points that was worth. And at the end of the game, whoever has, after 5 turns or whatever, whoever has more points killed wins.
Right, yeah.
If you have more of your enemy's models killed, you win, or
Yeah.
more points worth. So you might lose a squad of infantry, but if they lose a tank, that's more points.
Right, yeah, because that's a bigger loss for them than it would be for you.
Yeah. And that's typically how the games are played at a casual level, is just kill points. But at a higher level in tournament play, it's usually there's objectives and missions that you have to draw, and then there's different deployments you have to do.
Right, so it's not necessarily always about wiping your team out. It's sometimes just about getting the most points.
A great example is one of the first. I only played a couple games in 9th edition Warhammer, but I ended up losing one, and then I ended up winning the next one with the same list because the objectives were a little bit different. It was just hold points. Well, I had guys that weren't really good at killing anything, but they were extremely good at not dying. And so I just put them on an objective, let them not die,
Right.
and I had the points from those objectives.
Nice.
I guess and you can do this on a smaller scale too. So a good example of a smaller scale game would be like Gaslands.
Right, yeah, Gaslands is definitely a smaller mini war game, which costs you the price of a Matchbox.
Yeah.
Or a Hot Wheels, so $1.
Yeah, but
get them at a rummage sale, you can get them for cheaper probably.
And then when you talk a little bit about Gaslands, then you've played a fair amount.
Yeah, no, I played Gaslands. It's a really good entry level mini war game, and it doesn't have to be entry level because you can get more advanced. You can have seasons, you can have all this other stuff, but essentially Gaslands is car wars, post apocalyptic. Race for the final. You go through all the checkpoints to get to the end, and he who finishes first wins, right? But to do that, before y'all start doing that, you have to get yourself some matchboxes, pimp them out so they look like Mad Max cars. Essentially, that's what it comes down to. And then it's a points based. You have so many points to start. I think it's 100 points initially. That's usually about 250-point cars. Yeah. You could, of course, have a 75-point car and 25-point car.
Yep.
One that's powerful and one that's weak. Just kind of like the same thing with your armies. You have a defensive and then you have the fast.
Yeah.
And but it's super cheap. The rules are really easy. In fact, I think they even give away the basic rules online.
Yeah.
Like you can just download them. If you want the book, which I would recommend highly, getting the refueled book, you get some more rules. You get the
templates and
stuff. Templates. Yeah, you get paper. You get the paper version of the templates. So you can cut them out, make your own. But with that, you can also set up seasons. There's all kinds of different customizations that they don't give you in the free list, and it's a really fun, easy way. And it literally can be for anybody. We've had little kids come in here, buy the stuff, bring them home, and they play with their parents.
Yeah.
It doesn't. This is an entry level game that anybody can do. You basically roll dice, you raise a card across the table, and you put up obstacles like in any other war game.
Yeah, and I think as far as let's talk a little bit about budget options for wargaming.
Yep.
Because that's usually the turnoff for most people in getting into these is the price tag.
Yeah, it's like the funny meme. I don't know if you've seen it. If you haven't, you should go look it up. It's funny. Guy's talking. His girlfriend says, "Take me somewhere expensive." In the next picture, they're sitting at a dinner table or like a restaurant table inside of a Games Workshop building. I mean, so yeah, there is that. That is expensive. There's levels, like you said. There is levels, and
so I think like the bare bones budget get into a game.
Yeah.
Would probably be Gaslands would be a good one.
Yeah, because who doesn't have Matchbox cars and knows somebody that has Matchbox cars laying around?
But if the aesthetic of that doesn't really appeal to you, and maybe you do like 40K, or you like Star Wars, there you have other options.
Yeah, there's a lot of mid-tier options. That's Star Wars I would consider. There's mid-tier in Star Wars and there's high-end in Star Wars.
Yeah.
Mid-tier would be things like X-Wing, which are the models are expensive per model, but you can't have very many on the field.
Yeah.
You can have 2, 3, 4 models and that's it. And so that's kind of like the $40, $50 price range. And then there's Star Wars Armada, which is a little more expensive.
Higher end one, yeah.
Yep. Legion, which is kind of more on the higher end because you have to have multiple boxes of units, really.
Which is interesting because Legion you can play at a fairly small army size.
Yep.
And it's still a good game. I've played skirmishes in Legion, and you don't need a whole lot to play it.
Right.
Their starter boxes a lot of times for Legion will give you 2 armies that can each be fielded
Right.
fairly reasonably at a skirmish level, and you get a fair amount of options with it.
Okay.
And that's a very good, like, if you're looking in like the $100 to $200 US
Yeah.
price range.
Right.
Otherwise, if you want to try 40K, their starter boxes,
Yeah.
they usually release a starter box, a big one with every set, with every edition, and that's usually in the ballpark of like around 200-ish US dollars. It's
Yeah.
pretty comparable to the
Yeah.
Legion. Um, the amount of points you're going to get isn't a lot. And when I say points, points is a value of how much each model is worth for your army. So typically, if a game is played at like 2,000 points of 40K, that would be like a squad of 10 infantrymen of Marines, let's say, is probably around 200 points.
Right.
So the price gets a little out of hand in 40K really quick. But it's something that I know a lot of game stores do. When I lived in an area that had a pretty active 40K scene,
Right.
they did what's called escalation leagues.
Yeah.
And so you start with a very small amount of points,
Right.
and then you can kind of buy and build your army over the course of a year.
Right. Yeah.
And then so the investment doesn't feel as awful up front. You can kind of ease into it.
Right.
Um, Another one that was really the one that got me into tabletop wargaming was 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy Battles.
Okay.
That's not around anymore, but it is coming back.
Right.
And that was there was an Isle of Blood box set, and it came
Yeah.
with Skaven and High Elves.
Yeah.
And you got two armies. Usually you go half and half with somebody.
Right.
wants
That
to-
way one person gets one army.
Yep. And then you kind of just play that way. And just don't be afraid to play at smaller points values.
Right.
It's really enticing to want to play a massive army right away and get into it right away. But if you don't know what you're doing, it's not worth it. Oh, I completely forgot. Games Workshop does have a ton of different box sets.
Yep.
So they have like Space Hulk, where you're playing
Oh, right.
Terminators versus Tyranids.
Right.
They have Kill Team. I don't know if Kill Team's around anymore. I think it's Strike Force now is what it's
Okay.
called. But it's basically it's a pretty cheap box comparatively,
Right.
relatively speaking. And you just play with that list. And that you have special rules for that list, and it's its own format. If you go into some of the older 40K books, you can get into Kill Team, which there you can run 5 to 10 models.
Right.
And that's your whole army. And that's a lot of fun. Played a lot of Kill Team.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed Kill Team.
I know we've been talking about the big ones. There are a lot of other styles. The reason we're talking about the ones we know is because they're the ones we know. We're talking about Gaslands. We know Gaslands. We know Legion. We know Warhammer. But there are other war games out there. Plenty of them. And some are just knockoffs of the bigger ones.
Yeah.
But there's also things like Fallout. They have a mini war game.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Now you can buy the box set for $80, and you get, I think, 18 miniatures. I think you get like
Which is
8 survivors and 10 monsters.
it's a pretty
I think
pretty
is
good
what you
deal,
get.
yeah.
That's not bad.
War Mahordes. Well, it's War Machine and Hordes.
Yep.
Are two separate ones, but people call them War Mahordes. That's a pretty common one. Bolt Action is another
Yep.
very common one. I've seen a lot of people play that.
BattleTech.
BattleTech is another great budget
Yeah.
option.
Yeah. Pretty cheap, and they're not
Flames
bad
of
either.
War and Bolt Action aren't necessarily budget options, but they're more historical.
Right.
War game. There's also Black Powder, which has tons of different stuff. They have like that's like set in the 1800s,
Right.
I believe. So you have like Shaka Zulu
Right.
and the Zulu tribe. You have British like colonialists. You have Native Americans from the French and Indian War.
Nice.
There's tons of different historical factions. There's also another one, I believe it's called SPQR. It's Romans.
Okay.
And I can't remember who makes that. I think it's the same guys who make Conflict 47.
Okay.
There's like so many of these games.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to throw so many at you.
No, it's good. I think we need to.
But I know people
Mention
who have
it.
played Conflict 47,
Right.
and that's a really cool scenario or setting. It's an alternate where World War II didn't end,
Right.
and so you're into like the late 40s, early 50s,
Oh,
and
geez.
some of the technology that came out then is being used in
In combat instead of just sitting on the shelf.
yeah, and you also have like crazy things like werewolf faction,
Oh,
and like
jeez.
there's all it gets wild.
Nice.
But yeah, it's got some really cool aesthetics to it. Other great budget options for wargaming I can think of off the top of my head is again back to the GW.
Yep.
Any of their box sets. Necromunda was great. Shadespire.
Yep.
Shadespire is really fun.
Right.
That is very few models. You basically just have a set warband that you bring, and then you build decks of cards
Right.
to give you powers and achieve objectives and stuff like that.
I think that.
I think it's called Warhammer Underworlds.
Yeah, that could be. I don't remember. Yeah. I know that there's a lot of options, and I know that there's many choices to choose from. There was one. There's one option. I wish I could remember the name of it. This old guy comes in about once a year and still asks me, "Is someone willing to play this yet? Or someone bought into this yet?" It's a Civil War style game, and I asked him about it one time. I said, "Well, how many minis do you need?" Couple thousand.
Wow.
Because they literally take these
They're
like
tiny, yeah.
the little 12 millimeter minis,
Mm-hmm.
and they're all painted because you have to paint. And they're all pewters, so they're expensive as crap. And he sets up like 1,000 on his side of the table, and you set up 1,000 on your side, and
Yeah.
then you go, and then you roll out to battle.
Yeah, there's
Like,
there's a lot of games like that.
that's crazy.
I've noticed kind of a shift into the skirmish. Yeah, basically, I guess we can categorize it into like skirmish style games and then grand battle games. And some of them bridge the gap. Like
Yeah.
Legion does it. I cannot stress enough how if you want to get into a tabletop wargaming community
Right.
that is competitive, that is very cheap for the price point as far as
Right.
grand strategy is concerned, Legion is a great option.
Yep.
And the models are very easy to assemble,
Yep.
depending on who you're playing. Some of the newer ones have more dynamic poses and stuff.
Right.
But yeah, there's tons of options to play these games. So I think we covered like the war game itself a
Right.
little bit, but there's a big part that a lot of people don't realize, and that I'll give you a little anecdote. I bought the Isle of Blood box set for Warhammer Fantasy. My
Yep.
buddy's like, "Oh yeah, these are fun." I used to play Lord of the Rings box sets like
Yep.
this, and
Yep.
it's a great fun. I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'll buy it." So I spent the money, and I opened the box up, and all I get is this flat pieces of plastic on sprues. They're
Yep.
called. I learned later, and you have to cut them out, glue them together, paint them, and then play.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it. Most war games, there's a lot more to it than just out of the box experience.
There's quite a few now that you can just out of the box glue the minis down and play,
Right.
or snap them in. A lot of them have
Yep.
snap together minis to play. Just kind of like, I would encourage you to go into your local game store, wherever it is, your brick and mortar store.
Right.
Typically most places that sell Magic and things like that.
Probably will have at least some knowledge of mini war games.
You're gonna find someone there who knows mini war games.
Right. Someone in the corner waiting to talk to you about it, whether you want to or not.
And the people are very passionate. Almost every war gamer I've ever met is extraordinarily passionate about it.
Yeah.
They love to play their game. They love to talk about
I mean,
their
you
game.
spend a lot of money on miniatures and I'm not speaking for all miniature companies, but I'll just speak for GW because their minis are second to none in quality.
They're like impressive. The sculpts are great.
Their sculpts are, and when you go through and you put them together, you take the painstaking time to put them together, then you take the time to paint them, and you feel that army on the table. That's an impressive thing, just in its own right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the stuff you could put on a wall and be proud of yourself.
Yeah.
But to actually get to play with them, that just gets that fuel going because you can use your imagination, and it's a quite addictive.
Yeah, it's a very compelling thing to do.
Right.
So let's talk about the hobby side a little bit, because I think you and I are similar in we both undertook the hobby side for several years before we ever even played a game.
Yeah.
Like I painted and assembled minis for myself and others.
Yep.
For probably 3 years, 4 years before I ever even like bought a codex and said, okay, let's play.
Yep.
It just I got addicted to the painting and the modeling of it. It's just
that's
like
what I
building
did.
model planes or model cars.
Yeah, I remember I ordered, as a store owner, I ordered the Warhammer GW. They had a base thing you had to carry, their top 40 products or whatever, SKUs they call them. Top 40 SKUs, then you could go to town. And so I did that. Well, during that, you got a couple box sets. I think at the time it was Dark Angels versus Orcs, maybe? Was it Dark Angels or Orcs? I don't remember the opposing faction. Or maybe it was Chaos Marines.
It was I don't
I don't
remember.
remember. Yeah, it's kind of because I took the Dark Angel army and I let somebody else have the other army.
I think it was Chaos because
I think it was
I
Chaos.
think Gamer Joe ended up with the Chaos Army
Yeah,
or most of it, the cultists and all that.
yeah, the cult. Yeah, it was cultists. Yep, cultists. Yeah, I could remember. It seemed unfair because I would have two like Space Marine armies and then a Dreadnought, and I think there might have been
Some fortifications.
yeah some other stuff, but they had like twice as many cultists that I had Space Marines. I thought, what the heck?
Yeah, but then you go in and you roll it
But then
out.
the point wise, it makes that yeah. But I put all of them together. I bought some extra stuff on the side. I think I made a whole army, and I only played it one time.
So
But that was just the fun part of the hobby. Was just assembling and painting and
let's talk about that a little bit because if you're gonna get into wargaming and you want to do it long term,
yep,
your best bet would be to probably pick up a starter set, maybe get
yep,
some plastic glue, get some clippers, assemble the minis,
yep,
put them on the bases. Don't worry about painting them just yet.
right,
Find someone to play with, get some games going, see if you like it. If you like it, then take the leap and prime all your models after building them.
yep,
And start painting. And the painting is going to be an expensive part of it too. We did an episode on budget paints and stuff.
right.
There's there's a couple other great games I wanted to talk about. Um, sorry, I'm backtracking
Yep.
a little bit, but Frosthaven is another great one
Oh yeah, Gloomhaven and Frosthaven.
because sorry, not Frosthaven. But yes, they have great minis as well. Um, oh my goodness, I can't remember the name of the game. You play like a bunch of it's miniature agnostic they call it. So you can use minis from anything.
Okay.
And it's kind of like a warband style game where
Okay.
you take the same warband and you fight and you add to them or lose
Right.
members if they die. Um, Frostgrave.
Frostgrave. Yep.
And that's a great option because that you can just use any old minis you have laying around. You don't even need specific minis.
Right.
I bought WizKids minis for $5 for 3 of them.
Right.
And played that as my Frostgrave. Had a wizard, a lich, whatever.
Right.
And you can use any minis you want.
So
there's a lot of games out there. You can basically run a Google search if you want and search for miniature agnostic games.
Right.
And you'll find a whole plethora of games that you can use basically any minis you want. That's a great way to get into it as well.
Right.
But yeah, back to the hobbying side of it.
Yeah, it's time consuming too.
Yeah.
None of this is quick. When you get into the hobby, it's not even just a hobby. It's I don't know. It's kind of a lifestyle.
I was just gonna say yeah. It's kind of a lifestyle.
You get into it. You get into it. It's like buying a new car. You buy enough minis. That you can't settle. A lot of people won't settle for just one army.
No.
They buy the one army. They start off with I don't remember what you started off with.
I started playing with high elves and
fantasy. Okay, yeah, high elves and fantasy, and now I know you have at least 3 or 4 armies at least.
Yeah, I have 1 for Legion and 2 for 40K right now.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean you're not going to go buy orcs at some point because orc models are just fun to play with. And they're fun to look at and assemble, and you can do whatever you want.
And you can do a horrible job with it. It looks great,
right? Because that's orcs, yeah. But I mean, it's just it's a commitment. So I definitely would go to your local game store, get into it. Maybe they might even have armies to play with.
Yeah.
I know there's some of the game stores I used to have armies to play with. I used to, when I did that box set, I had both armies set up to play, but then it kind of died off here because they were changing the rules every year, it seemed like.
Yeah.
That really kind of turned some people down, but it seems like they've kind of got a nice set of rules now that.
Yeah, they've kind of figured it out a little bit.
Are making people happy. So.
Yeah. Like 40K, for example, has been streamlined quite a bit. Legion's been good the whole time I've played.
Yeah.
From start to now, since I've played Legion, it's been great.
Right.
They update the rules fairly frequently. They don't make any drastic changes or sweeping changes to make something unplayable.
Right.
There's only 4 or 5 factions.
Yeah, there's not too many factions.
And because of that, it's fairly easy to balance because you have less. You don't have a brand new faction coming in all the time, and all of a sudden its rules are broken and completely impossible.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of options, but the hobbying side, I mean, painting, and you're gonna find too, I was never interested in 40K for the most part. And then I found some models I thought looked cool, and then I started reading books.
Right.
And that's part of the lifestyle thing.
Yeah.
It's like you end up, it's almost like learning a new language,
Yeah.
some of the stuff, because
Oh no, it is.
you're talking about things like, oh, I gotta remove the mold lines off of my models, and people like you say that to a random person, and they're
It's
like, what are
like,
you talking
yeah,
about?
are you
But
okay?
you say that to a war game, and they're like, oh man, I feel your pain. I've been
Yeah,
there.
exactly.
And then another thing too, if you want to try get into the hobbying side of things and see if you like it, um, I know from my experience, I painted a lot of armies and a lot of models for people for games I never played
Right.
or had no interest in playing, but they just wanted their models painted. They didn't even care if it was painted well.
Yep.
They just wanted some paint on it to get it looking, decent from 3 feet away,
Yep.
5 feet away.
Yep.
And so if you go to your local game store, and I know a lot of local game stores even do like paint nights where they have a bunch of people come in, hobby nights,
Yep.
and they bring all their spare minis, we do bit swaps where you take all of your excess bits off of
Right.
that you did put on your models, and you can trade them with people, and you can mishmash everything
Yep.
together, make them look cool. There's tons of options and variety for games like that. Also, there's a lot of board games that just have really sweet looking minis as well.
Yep. Oh yeah. It's
We
just
talked about Gloomhaven and Frosthaven. They have gorgeous minis.
so many anymore. It's getting to be kind of the thing anymore. It's the days of the token pawn thing that Sorry had, and every other game in the world had the
Yeah.
same red or elongated pawn token, whatever you want to call them, bird pieces. Are pretty much done now. They don't. There's very few games that use pieces like that
Yeah,
anymore.
even Risk now has,
Yeah,
cannons and so
yeah.
on.
Instead of just little X's and
Yeah, that's it.
triangles or whatever they were.
Yep.
Yeah, no, it's getting to be, and I think that's kind of where we've evolved, and it's evolving, and it's getting to be quite the mainstream thing. It used to be kind of a fringe thing. Europeans were really the only people that played Warhammer for many, many years,
Yeah.
and it slowly trickled into our country, into the states here, and then other companies started like, hey, we want to get on this before Warhammer takes over.
Yeah.
And then we have all these games out there that we can play, which is
And
fantastic.
it's kind of information overload to start with. But again, it's like find a setting that you like. There's tons of these games out there. Find one that just looks interesting to you.
Yeah.
And then don't worry about like what army's strong or anything like
Right.
that.
No, just play.
When it comes to 40K or Legion or Gaslands even,
Yeah.
pick something that you think that looks cool and that you'll be excited to paint or excited to put together.
Yeah.
And just have fun with it. Have fun with the hobby of it. Don't worry about, like, to me the hobby comes first and the gaming comes second,
Right.
because I've always liked painting and building the models.
Yep. No doubt.
And so I've always built armies that aesthetically appealed to me. I just we won't talk about the
Yuck.
the Nurgle tanks
Right.
sitting over there.
Yeah, that's appealing. All right. I mean, they are cool looking.
They're cool looking, and
Gross.
it's just there's a lot of options out there.
And there's more coming out every day. Every time I get a new trade magazine from one of the distributors, there's new stuff coming out. There's new, and it's amazing. So
Yeah.
hopefully your local game store is keeping up. And I would definitely rely a lot on your local game store. I'm not saying that as a game store owner. I'm just saying that if you go online, you could get research and you can do research, but it's different than if you're sitting there touching the minis.
Yeah, like I never would have, like, I looked at 40K and it was in my periphery, and I looked at Legion, it was in my periphery, but until I walked into a game store and saw people playing it, I
Right.
never thought, oh,
Right.
this is something I want to do.
Yeah. When you see the table set up and you see the train, and it's quite amazing.
A couple ones I want to talk about is when I lived in the town I went to college in.
Yep.
There was a mini war game store that had just come into town.
Right.
And there's a lot of people there that played Bolt Action and Flames of War. And one of my first like fond memories of wargaming was going into that place. And they had a D-Day set up. Somebody had built an entire table modeled after one of the beaches at D-Day. I think it was Omaha Beach. They had all the fortifications, and then all the German soldiers were there painted up in their machine gun bunkers, and all the US forces and Canadian forces and British forces were there. And like it was just absolutely stunning to look at. And they had poured resin and made the water and had all of the tank traps and the barbed wire, and all this was to scale. So it's like a model railroad
Right.
kind of deal or a model car kind of deal. But imagine that, but an entire beach landing.
Right. That's crazy.
And the other one that was really impressive to me, and I just saw it again when I went and visited that game store a while ago, was somebody had built a Helm's Deep.
Oh, nice.
Like a full 2-scale Helm's Deep. And this table was huge. Like this, it was it was probably 4 feet by 8 feet.
Right.
Like it was just massive. And they had the wall out front, and then everybody, they picked a day, everybody got together. They brought all of the Lord of the Rings miniatures they owned. So everybody brought all their minis they had.
That's crazy.
And they had all of the Rohan, all the
Rohirrim,
all the Rohirrim. They had all of the Elf Guard, and then they had two or three people that had all the Uruk-hai and Isengard, and the battlefield was just stunning.
Shit.
And it was such a good success that they were actually talking about doing Pelennor Fields and building
nice.
Minas Tirith and all of that.
Nice.
And it's really cool because there's so much that goes into it.
Right. Yeah, if you like any of that stuff, any of that lore, or even that history or anything, any of those shows you watch, like even if you watch the shows and you walk into a game store and you see that, you're like,
that's really cool.
I want to do that.
Yeah.
Like that's pretty
Or
cool.
you see the Smaug mini.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Goodness.
I almost bought that. I'm like, man,
one of the players had it,
one.
and we, I think 4 or 5 of us each did a part of painting and building it. And when it was done, it looked so gorgeous.
Yeah, no, it's a big mini.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, wargaming, like Guff just said, go to your local game store, talk to the people, get to know the people, because first off, if you don't like the people that you're talking to at the game store, and you don't like the vibe you're getting, you're probably not going to like the hobby.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And this is not something that you want to just buy and build and sit in your bedroom.
No.
I mean, you can have plenty of fun doing that, don't get me wrong. But the community is a big part of it.
Right. No, the community is a huge part. And when you get involved in a hobby, you got to remember there are always going to be the typical power gamer, like whether you're playing video games, board games, or Warhammer, you're going to have that guy he's the know-it-all, he's the min-maxer. Doesn't mean he's going to win. It's just that's what he thinks all the time.
Yeah. And
just ignore those people and look at the rest of the people, because not everybody there is going to be that way.
And my word of advice to you veteran wargamers is don't be a gatekeeper. Don't just information overload people and tell them what they're doing is wrong. Try to encourage people to play and try different things.
Yep.
Because if you've been playing a game for a long time and someone comes in and says, hey, you guys ever thought about playing this game? And you laugh them out of the store.
Right.
Well, it turns out a year later, you guys are all playing that game.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
But now you're down a player who could have been a fun player to have. You just never know.
No, you don't know.
I don't recommend gatekeeping people.
Right.
It's just not healthy for the hobby.
Yeah, no, it's not. Anyway, I think that'll be that for unless we have more to talk about.
No, I think we've covered quite a bit.
Alrighty, well, until next time.